Are we on? We're on. I can hear it. Yep. Good morning, everyone. My name is Glenn Anderson, and welcome to our exploration of thinking like an improv actor and what that means to try to help your team become more collaborative and communicative and effective. Let me begin with a story. I was standing on the stage one night of a comedy club, and I was waiting for the audience to provide a suggestion that my partner Chris and I were going to use to create an improvised scene. Now, if you've ever been to improv before, you've seen improv comedy performed, you know how this works. The actors come on stage, they ask for a suggestion from the audience, and then they take that suggestion and use it to create a scene on the fly with no rehearsal, no script, no pre-planning. And they ask for different suggestions. Sometimes they ask for an object to be the center of the scene, or perhaps a relationship between the actors. On this particular night, Chris and I had decided we were going to ask for a location as the suggestion. Now, when you ask for a location, of course, you can get anything. You might get something very vague like France, or maybe you get something a little more specific, Paris. An even better suggestion would be something like under the Eiffel Tower. That would be a cool suggestion for an improv scene. So this particular night, we asked for a location. We got a great suggestion. The suggestion was a corner office in a high-rise office building. Great suggestion. So now what has to happen is one of us needs to do something to initiate the scene, to get it going with an action or an opening line of dialogue. And so I turned to Chris and I said, "Thank you for coming to see me. I want to review your job performance for the last several months." Now, what did I accomplish with that line? Sounds like I'm the boss, this is my office, he's my employee, I've called him in for a job performance review. So Chris looks back at me and he says, "I don't have to listen to you, you're not my boss." So in one line, Chris has negated everything that I was trying to get going with my opening line. So now I'm thinking, how can I keep this scene on track? So I look back at Chris again and I said, "Actually, I am your boss. Apparently, you never read the email." And Chris looks back at me and he says, "Well, I don't read any emails. They've never given me a computer." So again, he's negated everything. See, what I needed Chris to do was to take what I put out there with my opening lines and then build on it. So for example, I could have said, "Thanks for coming to see me, want to review job performance." And Chris could have looked back at me and said, "Yeah, boss, I'm sorry. I have a rare disease. I sleep 23 hours out of every day." And I could say, "Well, okay, but in that 24th hour, I need a little more productivity out of you." And maybe Chris could say, "Well, I'm sorry, but in that 24th hours, when I go to the doctor to find out why I'm sleeping the other 23 hours, or something like that. But now the scene is rolling along. In improv terminology, what I needed Chris to do was to say yes and. Yes, I hear and acknowledge what you have put out there, and now I'm going to add to it. But in fact, what Chris was doing was Chris was saying no, or Chris was saying yes, but. And he was not collaborating with me to get the scene really rolling along. And this is one of the things I want to talk to you about this morning, is this power of thinking and saying yes and to make your team a more collaborative environment, your work with your colleagues in a more open communication kind of way. And so we're going to explore that as one idea among several I'm going to share with you this morning on how to think like an improv actor. And this is one way to do it, to think and say yes and. But before we get into that, let me just give you a little bit of background. Improv comedy performance got its start in 1959 in Chicago at the University of Chicago, where a group of graduate students were studying acting. And their acting teacher, a woman named Viola Spolin, she was teaching them how to become better actors by playing improv games. And these improv games were quite fun and entertaining, and the students said, you know, we could do these in front of an audience and it would be a good show. And that's what led to the start of the famous improv comedy club in Chicago called the Second City. Second City's still rolling along today, more popular than ever. There's branches in New York, Toronto, Los Angeles. A lot of famous comic actors got their start at Second City. Bill Murray, Tina Fey. If you remember a few years ago, there was a big movie, The Blues Brothers. John Belushi, Dan Aykroyd, they started at Second City. More recently, the talk show host Stephen Colbert, Steve Carell, the actor, movie actor, all got their start on stage at Second City. Now, a little bit about me. My corporate career came from IBM. I'm a techie from the IBM world, but I've also spent most of my adult life studying and performing improvisational comedy. So it was IBM by day and improv by night. And so these days, as a professional speaker, I try combining those two things to share some of the material like I'm doing with you this morning. So I had the opportunity to attend and graduate from Second City's training program called the Players Workshop of Second City. So when you go through a bunch of improv training like that, they teach you the skills and the techniques that you need to use on stage to successfully create improvisational scenes. So let me give you an example. So here's 6 actors. They're doing an improv scene on stage. The first thing you might notice, it looks like they're toasting like it's a party or something like that. But notice they don't have any glasses in their hand. That's one of the tenets of improv. There's no props. Think about it. How can there be props? You don't know what the scene is going to be until you get the suggestion. So everything is pantomime, so there's no props. Another thing people often do is they look at a picture like this and they go, well, there's 6 actors on stage and there's no script. There was no rehearsal. How does this just not turn into chaos? And the reason it doesn't is there's a rule that they're following, and the rule is that at any point in time, one actor has focus. And so they are the ones that are speaking or doing a major activity of some kind. They have focus. And then at some point, they either give the focus to another actor, or another actor chooses to take the focus from them by saying something or doing something with an action. So the focus moves around the room using this technique called give and take. Another thing people often ask is, well, where does the dialogue come from? How do they know what to talk about? And every scene has a who, a what, and a where. And so in my example scene with Chris, the who was boss, employee, the what was a job performance review, the where was my corner office. So you think about it for a second. If you're a boss, an employee in an office with a performance review, what would you say? And that's where the dialogue just grows out of that. So now you're all ready to be improv actors, right? You got it all down. So let's begin by exploring in a little more detail here this whole concept of yes and. In your world, one example of yes and is Wikipedia. Emily mentioned it in the last session as an example of collaboration. And Wikipedia is yes and thinking, right? People put something out there and then other people add to it. Open source is yes and thinking. Again, people put some code out there and then other people say, yeah, I like that, and now let me add to it. That's yes and thinking. In a team environment, in a work environment, yes and affirms the members of the team and builds this environment that I'm describing to you. People who say no, or people who say yes but, are people who are trying to maintain control of the conversation. They are trying to maintain control of the idea. There are so many ways that you can block communication in a team environment or with the colleagues that you work with. Not truly listening to what they're saying, changing the subject, correcting the other person all the time, always having a better idea than what the first person would put out there, simply saying no. Nobody likes the curmudgeon who thinks it's their job to show up at the team, to show up at every meeting and say no all the time. Don't be this guy, all right? I mean, if you think it's your job to show up and say no to everything everyone's suggesting, you are positioning yourself as smarter than everyone else in the room, more important than everyone else in the room. So when we talk about thinking yes and, that little word and becomes a verbal bridge between what the first person has put out there and now your response, your respectful response to what they have said. Now, don't be confused. Sometimes people think I'm suggesting that you just say yes to everything, that you're just running around going yes, 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 and that is not what we're talking about here. Because what you're saying is, yes, I hear what you said, yes, I acknowledge what you have said, and now here's my response, and your response might be, I don't think that's a very good idea, or here's the reasons why I'm not sure that that would work. So you're not agreeing with them, you're acknowledging, you're saying, yes, I hear what you said, and now I'm going to add to it. And so this kind of thinking, again, thinking and saying yes and, affirms the people you work with, affirms the members of your team, and builds this collaborative environment of open communication. Now, as you think about this environment that we're building here, this is an important point. Thinking and saying yes and, first of all, requires you to trust the other people on your team that they're going to support and build on your contribution, and then you have to be willing to do the same thing back for them. In the improv world, there's a thought. We say when you're creating a scene, you should come into the scene and bring a brick, not a cathedral. Can you kind of imagine what that means? You know, I want to come into the scene and I want to add my idea to the scene. I don't want to come into the scene with the whole scene already constructed. I want to bring a brick. I don't want to bring the whole cathedral already created. And there's a game that we play. Sometimes you'll see actors do it on stage. You do it in rehearsal. And it's called telling a story one word at a time. You ever seen improv actors do that kind of thing on stage? And so all the actors line up on stage, and usually you ask the audience for something like maybe a type of story that the audience wants to hear. So the audience says, fairy tale. Okay, so here we go, one word at a time. So once upon a time, there was a farmer. He lived in the village. He had a magic barn. And so this story is unfolding one word at a time. And I got to tell you, as one actor participating in that, that's a really hard thing to do. Not just because you're trying to think up what a good word is, but when you put your word out there, you probably have an idea in your head of what you want the whole story to look like, but yet you have to trust everybody else on stage that they're going to build the story that's going to work. I have to trust those other people. So for example, maybe the story's going along, there was a farmer, he lived in the village, he had a, and it's my turn. And I put out the word magic, so that's my word. He had a magic. And in my head, I have built the entire cathedral, so I'm picturing that what he has is a magic barn. And so the next actor, it's their turn, and they say, cow. Cow? It's not a magic cow, it's a magic barn. Everybody knows it's a magic barn. But see, I had to trust that that is where the story was going to go. If I'm all hung up on my cathedral that I built, where it's a magic barn, I'm not going to really be able to contribute. And so that's what this is talking about here, that you have to trust the other people on your team to build on your contribution to what you're putting out there. And then you have to be willing to trust them as they put their contribution out there. That's what yes and thinking is all about. Now, at this point, some people are saying, yeah, but it really sounds like, Glenn, you're just talking about we should agree with everybody all the time. and that is not true. This is not a replacement for quality or common sense. There is a time and a place to edit and to filter what's being worked on. My suggestion is it is not right at the beginning. I kind of liken this to sports teams. If you go to watch a sports team, before the game starts, they run out onto the field, they run out onto the court, and they're just kind of throwing the ball around, and they're warming up, and they're not following the rules of the game. They're just kind of getting warmed up. And then at some point, the whistle blows, and then the game starts, and now we're going to follow the rules. And the same thing would be true here. That is, you're doing some problem solving, you're doing some creative thinking, yes and, yes and, yes and, I'm trusting everyone. But then at some point, maybe, reality has to set in, and there's some quality discussion, some common sense that has to come into play, but it's not at the start. Thinking yes and gives people the confidence that as they work in their team, as they work with their colleagues, that they can truly create something out of nothing. This makes sense? All right. I have a little exercise that we're going to do together to see what you think and feel about yes and. So the first thing I need you to do is I need you to find a partner that you're going to have a conversation with. So you need to pair up with someone, or 3 people can do it is fine too. So maybe you 3 and you 2 back there, and you got a 2 and a 2 and a 2 and a 2. Kenichi, maybe you want to move and join someone. So you need 1, 2, or 3 people. 3 people can do it as well. Okay. So here's what we're going to do first. I want you to have a conversation, and I just picked a topic just to give you something to talk about. So have a conversation that you're planning a party. Any kind of party. It could be a children's party, a birthday party, a retirement party. It doesn't really matter. But as you have this conversation back and forth between the 2 of you or the 3 of you, the rule is every time you start to speak, you have to say yes, but. Okay, so the first person puts something out there, and then the second person responds and starts by saying yes, but. And go along with the conversation that way. So try that for a while, see how that works. Have a little conversation, plan a party, see how it goes.
I would like a party, and I think we should have a child. I think we should do a water slide. Yes.
All right, let's bring it back here. How you doing? Getting anything done? I'm sorry, say that again? It immediately fell into a discussion about the framing device. Okay. All right, so one time I was doing this, and I had one of the audience people responded, and they said they felt like they were back in kindergarten. Yes, but, yes, but, yes, but. Okay, so now you know what we're going to do. We're going to try it again. So continue your conversation, or maybe you want to start over with a new party. So if you were talking about a kid's party, maybe switch to a retirement party or something, just to kind of change the conversation up a little bit. Only now the rule is every time you start to speak, you say yes and as you plan this party. So see how that goes for a minute. Give it a shot. Okay, let's bring it back one more time. So now how's it going? A little better? Actually getting that party planned at this point? So that's my first way to think like an improv actor that I would suggest to you in your team environment, in your work environment, is to think and say yes and. Any comments about that? Questions? Yes, sir.
It's really a powerful exercise because, like, when we were first talking with the yes, but it's almost like our first instinct was to think of a contradiction to what they had said. Like, I want this, but no, I want it this way. No, I want it this way. No. And the other way with yes and it was like yes, and then yes, I agree, but did we think about this? Can I add this? What else can we do with this?
So knowing you're going to say yes, but is kind of filling your head with negativity before you even open your mouth, right? Is what you're saying. Yeah.
I noticed the yes and conversation had a lot of great momentum. You know, like it felt like once an idea got pulled out, there was more room for more ideas.
Great idea. More momentum. Yes. Kind of opens it up, Jason.
Yeah, we felt like when we were planning our party, the yes but was just they kept introducing blockers, whereas the yes and allowed us to continue to build that up.
Yep. It's a blocker to open communication. Yep. Yeah. Emily?
When we were doing yes and, we were smiling a lot more.
Smiling is good. Okay. Yes and create smiles. I like that. Yep. Okay, we're going to keep moving here. I got a lot more to cover, but that's the first one. Think and say. Do you have a comment? I'm sorry. Oh, yeah. Think and say yes and. Let's talk about the word team here for a couple minutes. You know, we use the word team in business all the time. The title of my presentation is Energize Your Team's Performance. The executive is putting his team together. We're going to go off-site and do some team building exercises. I mean, we use the word team all the time. When you think about the definition of the word team, a number of persons forming one of the sides in a game or a contest. Little negative connotivity there, you know, it kind of suggests there's winners and losers, there's good guys and bad guys. Often a team consists of the starters and then there's the bench players, so there's kind of an implied hierarchy when you apply team to sports. Interestingly enough, at the Second City, the actors that form the troupe on stage are known as the ensemble. Interesting word, ensemble. It has an interesting definition. All the parts of a thing are taken together so that each part is considered only in relation to the whole. I like that, a very nice definition. I get the opportunity because I live in Chicago, so I get to go to Second City fairly often and watch their shows. And when you go all the time, you figure out after a while that they have built their ensemble around a template. So there's always, you know, a kind of a big goofy guy and a suave gentleman and a sophisticated lady, and maybe there's a couple people that are really good at doing impersonations or that kind of thing, and that creates this template. And you go and you see that over and over. Then one night you might go to the show and you realize, oh, that really funny big goofy guy I like so much, he's not in the cast anymore, but he's been replaced by another big goofy guy, because that's what that part of the ensemble requires. So let's talk for a couple minutes. How can we help your team become more of an ensemble? Again, as we continue to think about ways to think like an improv actor. And the first one here is an improv term we use called being in the moment. Now, when you're on stage doing improv, be in the moment means I'm not thinking about the last scene that didn't go so well. I'm not already thinking about what the next scene is going to be. I am paying attention and listening to what is going on in the scene I'm in right now. I'm in the moment. What does that look like in life? Have you ever been talking to someone in the middle of the conversation, they pull out their phone and start scrolling through their messages? They're not in the moment with you. Or do you ever have a team meeting and maybe you're sitting around a conference table and everyone's participating, but down at the end of the table is one guy, he's got his laptop open and he's typing away. He's not in the moment. Or you ever on a conference call And everyone's on the call, and you can hear the people talking, and people are contributing, and somebody says, Anna, what do you think about that? Anna? Anna? You there, Anna? And finally, Anna comes back on. Could you repeat the question? Anna was not in the moment. This is Anna. She was not in the moment. In fact, Harvard Business Review, they did a study recently. What else are employees doing during a conference call? Other work, sending an email, eating or making food, going to the restroom. I don't even want to think about that. Texting, social media, video games. Sorry, Emily, but video games. Online shopping, exercising, taking another phone call. These are people who are not in the moment. Folks, when you have a team meeting, when you're working together with your team, when you're on a conference call, a Zoom call, a video call, you have a choice. Your personal energy and your attitude, and those two things are linked together, folks. They are the result of a choice that you have made. And you can choose every day when you get up and you go to work or you log on or you join that Zoom meeting. You have a choice right then that you can be in the moment, just like a good improv actor. And your team, you can do energy accountability with your team. You can look at the people as you're sitting in that room having a meeting and make sure that everyone is dialed in, everyone is looking at everybody else, that there's energy accountability there to make sure that you and your team are in the moment. That's one idea about thinking like an improv actor, to turn your team into an ensemble. Here's another one. I talked at the beginning of the presentation about the improv technique of give and take. And this is so appropriate, especially when you're in a team meeting of some sort. You know, do you ever have team meetings where the manager's just standing in front or the leader doing all the talking and everybody else is just listening? You know, and so the energy is not there. People are pulling out their phones, kind of sitting back, you know, leaning back, not really any accountability of energy. And so if you can truly bring that energy forward with giving and taking, one person is contributing and then someone else is contributing, or someone respectfully takes the focus from them to make a comment in a yes and kind of way. Do you remember there was a book and a movie a number of years ago, Lord of the Flies? If you remember Lord of the Flies, all these young kids that were stuck on this island, and whenever they started having their meetings, they came up with a rule that as they sat in the meeting, one kid at a time had a conch shell, and only the kid with the shell could do the talking. And then they would hand the shell to someone else. They were doing give and take. So maybe your meetings need a conch shell, I don't know, or something like that, to try to get this going, one voice at a time, give and take. Surrender the need to be right. Boy, nothing shuts down open communication faster in a meeting than when there's one person that they've got the whole cathedral built and they know that they are right, and everyone else is not right. In my scene that I told you about at the beginning, Chris, you know, he was not giving up being right. He knew he was right. You know, he knew he was going to make this scene kind of go off the rails. I was not his boss. He was not listening to me, you know, all that kind of stuff. That was Chris in that improv moment. You know, he was not willing to surrender the need to be right. And nothing shuts down open communication faster than when someone on the team will not surrender the need to be right. Yes and, thinking yes and builds better ensembles. So in the moment, give and take, surrender the need to be right, and build better ensembles. Any comments about these? This is kind of my second collection of stuff here. You like those? Thinking about them? Everybody good? All right, let's move on to the third one. My third area is listening. So we've talked about yes and thinking, being in the moment, give and take, surrender the need to be right, and now listening. Folks, listening is at the core of great improvisation. Listening is the improv actor's superpower. You often, if you're watching a good improv show go on, you might be looking at this and go, man, those actors, they are so clever. They are so smart. How are they doing that? And there's kind of a secret there. One of the ways they're doing it is they are really listening to what everyone else is saying. And so they hear when some actor says something and they remember that. And then maybe a few moments later they refer back to that. Or they hear what someone said and then they can yes and build off of that. So listening, good listening is really the superpower of improv actors that are doing good improv scenes. So how can we be good listeners? Well, there's an interesting improv term, follow the follower. Notice it's not follow the lead, because in improv, when a group of actors are on stage doing a scene, one person is not the leader. If you have one person in that scene who's the leader, pretty much it just turns into a one-person show after a while, and that's not what you want. You want the focus moving around. And so the focus moves, follow the follower. So there's a game that we play in class to kind of reinforce this. So all the actors get in a circle, and one actor starts, and they start doing something like, let's say they start clapping. And everyone goes, oh, okay, they're the leader now, so everybody starts clapping along with them. And after a few moments, someone else stops clapping, and maybe they start, patting the top of their head. And so people go, oh, they're the leader now. And so everyone stops clapping, and everyone starts patting their head. And maybe after a few moments, one of the actors in the circle stops patting their head and maybe starts humming a tune. Everybody goes, oh, they're the leader now. And so we stop patting our head and we all start humming along with the tune. That's this idea of following the follower. And there's a leadership lesson there, folks. Leadership, good leadership, is not about maintaining the status. Leadership is about understanding what the status is as it moves from person to person. You might have heard the expression distribution of leadership. The fact that on your team there's not one leader all the time. And so that's why we're following the follower. And then right along with that, kind of a similar thought, is reading the room. I'm sure you've all heard that expression before, right? You look at all the people that you're dealing with on your team, perhaps, and the team meeting that you're having, and you're reading the room. Who's with you? Energy accountability. Is everyone involved? Is everyone contributing? There's a great story that comes out of the Second City that's an example of following the follower and reading the room, and here's how it went. There was an organization in Chicago who was having a meeting, a monthly meeting, and they needed a speaker for their meeting. And so they called up Second City and said, can you provide a speaker for next month's meeting? And Second City said, sure. And so the day of the meeting arrived, and the representative from Second City showed up at the organization to give a speech. And apparently there was a miscommunication, and the organization thought they were getting a speaker who was a subject matter expert in their particular area of expertise. And it turned out that this guy from Second City, he didn't know anything about their area of expertise. Undaunted, he decided to give the speech anyway. So he gets up in front of the room and he says, what's one of the biggest challenges your organization is facing today? And a couple of people raised their hand. He calls on someone, that someone put a challenge out there. And the speaker said, yeah, that sounds really complicated and hard. What could we do about that? And a few other people raised their hand and offered some suggestions. Great ideas. Yeah, that's really helpful. What's another challenge you're all facing today? And somebody else raises their hand and, yeah, that sounds really hard. That's complicated. What could we do about that? And a few people raised their hand and offered some suggestions. He went on like that for an entire hour. At the end of the hour, the audience gave him a standing ovation. He didn't even know what he was talking about. But all he did was he read the room and he followed the follower. He followed the leadership as it went around the room and helped those people really get great value out of that time that they were together. So, follow the follower, read the room, make mistakes work for you. In improv, this is kind of interesting. When something goes wrong in the scene, if you're a good improv actor, you can somehow grab that and make it a part of the scene and make it work for you. For example, when we do shows, when there's an improv show, and all of us actors are in one scene, and then we're in the next scene, and then we're in the next scene, it gets a little confusing sometimes if you keep calling each other by your actual name. Because it's sort of like, wait a minute, Glenn was a taxi driver, and now Glenn's a doctor, and now Glenn's a sales clerk. And so instead, we make up names for each other as we're doing the scene, so you have a different name in every scene. Well, that takes a lot of concentration because you have to kind of remember, okay, what's his name in this scene? Not the last scene, but what's his name in this scene? And so one night, we were doing a scene, and my name was John, and in my previous scene, my name had been Fred. And the actor that I was doing the scene with got confused, and rather than call me John, he called me Fred. I knew he'd made a mistake. The audience knew he'd made a mistake. But he wasn't aware. And so when he said that, I had this shocked look came across my face, and I turned and I looked at him and I said, "Who told you about my secret identity?" And that was an idea. We could just use that mistake and turn it into a whole different direction for the scene. Make mistakes work for you. There are a lot of bad listening behaviors out there. And I hope none of these are represented by you. Interrupting someone when they're talking. Responding vaguely or illogical. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, okay, yeah, sure, yeah. Are you really listening to that person? Fidgeting. You're sitting in a meeting, you're tapping on the table, you're clicking your pen. Again, these are not good listening behaviors. And this last one, looking at phone, looking at your watch, looking around the room, but the looking at the phone thing, that is really the thing today, right? Have you ever gone into someone's office and you're trying to have a reasonable, useful, effective one-on-one conversation with them, and their phone is sitting right there on the desk, and every time the phone dings, they stop looking at you and turn and look at the phone? That is bad listening. This is the secret here. Most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They simply listen with the intent to reply. Do you know what that means? It means that while someone is talking to you, you're not really listening to them. You are simply formulating in your head what you're going to say as soon as they shut up. And so you're not really listening. You're not listening to understand what they're saying. You're listening, waiting for them to stop so you can start talking. So listening to respond versus listening to understand is really the secret of good listening. All right, I have another exercise for you to see what kind of listeners you are. So you can team up again with the same folks that you were just with a minute ago to do this little exercise. And here's how it goes. So find a partner. You've already got your partners figured out. So begin a conversation again, and I've just given you a subject here to talk about. What makes a wonderful restaurant experience? What do you think? What makes a really wonderful dining experience? So this is something that the two or three of you can kind of talk to each other about. However, the rule here is that when the partner answers, they have to start with the last word or the last phrase, the last couple words that their partner just ended with. So here's an example. See, person one says, "I like restaurants that place candles on their tables." So the last word out of their mouth was tables. So that has to be your first word. Tables with legs are wobbly, bother me. So the idea here is obvious, right? You can't think about what you're going to say until you hear what the last word or phrase is that your partner has said. So give that a shot here for a couple minutes and see how you do as listeners.
The stacked experience for me as someone with experience
All right, let's bring it back. How's it going? You were doing it? Kind of, what'd you say? Kind of weird. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously the exercise is a little artificial. How'd you find it though? Did you find it doable? If you really were focused? Did it seem to be showing you what I was talking about listening all the way to the end before you formulate your response? You know, sometimes I think if people worry about silence. And so people feel like that when someone stops talking, you know, they need to jump right in. You know, they have to have something ready to go. And if we could kind of, as a society, you know, embrace silence a little more, because I listen to what you say all the way to the end, and now I can start formulating what I want to say back. But that means there's going to be a little bit of silence in there, and people don't like silence. It makes them nervous. So I think that's something that hopefully as a team, that would be something that you could work on and embrace, to truly be listening to understand. So let me review what we've covered here so far, and let's just kind of think about this for a minute. So these are a whole bunch of ideas on thinking like an improv actor. So the first we talked about yes and, which I believe really when you think and say yes and as you respond, you get away from saying no all the time, you get away from saying yes but all the time, creates a culture of open communication, collaboration, and trust within your colleagues. So that was the first section. Second section then was turning your team into an ensemble. And we had three primary areas there. Be in the moment. And that's an energy decision that you make every day, every hour that you step into a meeting or a conference call, you are making that decision to be in the moment. Your energy, accountability, give and take. If your team is the kind of team that everybody's talking all over each other, that the loudest person in the room always seems to dominate, maybe this is a conversation you need to have with your team about how to have one voice at a time rather than everyone talking back and forth, giving and taking, and then surrendering the need to be right. Is that something perhaps you have to deal with in your life a little bit as you work with your team, as you work with your colleagues? You know, you're not the smartest person in the room, as we heard in the last hour. Surrender the need to be right. And then the third area now we just talked about is listening to truly understand. And the ways you do that is it's not follow the leader. There's not one person who's always the leader. It's following the follower as the leadership is distributed, as the leadership moves around your team. Reading the room, understanding that people are tuned in, that there is energy accountability, and then when mistakes go wrong, make those mistakes work for you. There's a great story about mistakes that comes out of the entertainment world. It's called a circus bow. Has anybody ever heard this expression before? A circus bow. What this means is that if there's a clown at a circus, and the clown is up there and they're juggling or something like that, and they accidentally, drop one of their balls, or the clown is doing a tumbling act and they kind of miss and they kind of fall over sideways or something like that. You might think that the clown might kind of shrink away and not want to call attention to the fact that this mistake just happened. A circus bow is when the clown drops the ball, they turn to the audience and they go, ta-da! Or they turn, if it's like a three-ring circus, they turn around, ta-da! To everybody. That's taking a circus bow. And so I would suggest that in this area of making mistakes work for you. There's always going to be mistakes. Something's going to go wrong. You're going to make a mistake. When you do, don't shrink away from it. Take a circus bow. Okay, I got a few more things I want to share with you, but before I do that, I'm just going to pause right here. Any comments or questions about what we've been talking about?
I would like to thank you because I think you just taught me how to get through my teenagers. I think this whole thing is going to apply far beyond the teams I run at work.
And how to, you said, what was the beginning? How to?
Survive
survive your teenagers. Okay, yes, absolutely. Emily?
How do you follow the following follower when you keep getting pushed into the leader position?
Yeah, how to follow the follower when you're being pushed into leader. Well, I'd say that's the easy way to do it, because if you're been being pushed into being the leader, now you've got the focus for a moment, and so you can consciously give it to someone else. Like in a meeting, for example, maybe different people take leadership as they each report on their project that they're working on, and so you as the leader, okay, Jason, now you're the leader, you take it for a while, and Emily and Kenichi, you're the leader, you take it for a while. And so I think as a leader, you can make that happen for sure. Yes?
I get the concept of making mistakes work for you in like an entertainment context.
Yeah.
But how does that look like in a professional environment?
Well, yes. I mean, you put some mistakes in your code, you don't leave it there, and ta-da! The website looks like shit all the time, ta-da! Obviously. But I think, like, for example, in that kind of context, if there's mistakes in a technical thing that you've done, there's a lesson that your team can learn there, right? You've learned something, and now you can pass that on. And so making the mistake work for you, I mean, there's this whole thought of failure. You learn from failure, right? When something goes wrong, you don't shy away from failure. You have a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. You say, I can learn, I'm not afraid to try this. And so I would say that would be the general philosophy that you want, is that if something's gone wrong or there's been a failure, that you learn from that and share that education, intelligence with everyone else.
Okay.
That's one idea I come up with. Yeah?
How forceful are you typically with the yes and mechanism? It seems like it could really prevent you from saying something that's not necessarily related to the previous point. Perhaps I'm thinking of it too mechanically.
Yeah, I mean, okay, his comment is, how forceful should you be with yes and thinking all the time? I mean, let me make a confession here. I give you all these things and I overemphasize them a little, so that you take them and understand them. But I don't imagine that at every moment of every day in every team environment, everyone is always thinking yes and. I mean, you gave a perfect example of where the subject changes and now we're starting over again. We're not yes anding our way, through the rest of our lives. So take what I say here as interesting things to apply when it's appropriate, I would say. So now I've confessed, that, yes.
It's a very backwards view of how engineering is. So how do you help implement it into engineering?
Yeah, his comment is that this kind of thinking is a backwards view of how engineering often works. So how do you implement this? In general, I get that question a lot, not specifically about the engineering side, but just, what do I do when this isn't working, when my manager hates this, and that kind of thing. And I feel like the best answer I can give to that is that if you model this, hopefully other people will see what you are doing and can build off of it. So you got to start somewhere. So if you're in some team environment today where there's a bossy leader and everybody else shuts up and none of these things are happening, if you can go into that environment and bring some of this think like an improv actor mentality with you, then you become an example, and hopefully maybe one of your colleagues picks it up a little. That's about the best I have. Yeah, one more.
So I kind of understand like the bounce the ideas, follow the leader, change the focus around the room. So like in some team meetings I've had, we worked on this kind of approach. The only question I have is at the very end, right, when the time comes to make a decision. I feel like in a lot of the meetings I'm in, we'll all discuss it, and then at the very end, we'll sort of all just look at each other, like deer in the headlights. Okay, we need to make a decision. Who's going to take the lead? What's like the natural thing? Do we just kind of assume that the most senior person is the leader? They take the focus and they make the decision, or and not be so specific with that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, you've had this great discussion, yes-anding around the room, but now a decision has to be made. Yes, at some point, somebody's in charge, right? And so the hope would be that through the discussion, a consensus has been reached, and it's pretty obvious, what the answer is or what the direction is. But when that hasn't happened, someone has to take the leadership position at that point and say, okay, we've got, this idea, this idea, this idea, this, and we put them on a board or something like that, and maybe you vote or you do, whatever, however your team operates. So yeah, that's right. I mean, at some point, somebody has to take charge. You don't want to hold meetings where you hold the meeting for an hour and then it just ends and everybody walks away. You always want to have directly responsible individuals and who's going to do what by when and that kind of thing to make an effective meeting. So somebody at some point probably needs to take charge. Okay, I got a few more things I want to share with you here. First of all, if you like to read books about the kind of thing that I've been talking about this morning, these are 3 really cool ones. This one was written by some guys who worked at the Second City. Second City actually has a consulting arm, and you can hire them to come into your company and play the games we played today and do that kind of stuff. And so the guys that do that wrote this book, How Improvisation Reverses No-But Thinking and Improves Creativity and Collaboration. So a very fun book about Second City and about the kind of thinking I've shared with you today. This is a little more of a business-aimed book, Getting to Yes and. If you're interested in meetings particularly, he addresses a lot of how to use some of the things I've talked about today in a meeting environment, so that's helpful. And then if you just want some general, circus bow kind of philosophy, Improv Wisdom. I love her subtitle here. Don't prepare, just show up. Well, maybe sometime. You can't do that all the time, but again, you want to kind of an open mind as you come into things. You don't want to be stockpiling in advance all the time, all the answers in advance. So these are 3 fun books that you might want to take a look at. In the Yes and book, at the end of the book, the authors lay out kind of a list of, 25 or 30 things to think about that are sort of like, I call them advice from the world of improv. And so I want to end my presentation here today by taking you through those. And I'm not going to linger on each one. There's way too many of them. But what I'd like you to do is you kind of hear these one at a time, is just kind of let these sort of wash over you. Many of these, all of them, I think, apply in a work environment. Many of them, most of them apply in your life. And so the things we've been talking about today can certainly apply. You're going to solve your teenager problem, perhaps, some life lessons here. So just kind of let these sort of wash over you here as I give these to you in the last couple of minutes as I wrap up. Look people in the eye when you meet them. Eye contact, really wonderful thing. Smile. People will wonder what you're up to, right, when you're sitting at your desk smiling. Don't check your text or email when someone else is talking. That's the whole respect thing that we talked about earlier. Be curious. I suspect most of you are pretty curious. You all work in an industry in a part of the world where there's just one fabulous thing after another popping up, and there's plenty to be curious about. Make sure you stay curious. Try to eliminate the word no from your vocabulary for just one day. I was giving this presentation and a young lady raised her hand and she said, I have young children at home, this is not possible. Like, okay, maybe not. But how about at work? Could you maybe go through one whole day at work and not say no? When you're wrong, acknowledge it, say you're sorry, move on. Forgive yourself when you make a mistake, forgive others when they make a mistake. Lead as you would want to be led. When it's your turn to be the leader, if you have a good distribution of leadership going on, when it's your turn to be the leader, you be the leader that you want other people to be to you. Be on time. Boy, nothing can be a cancer on the ensemble more than when people are always late. You're waiting for people to show up. You're waiting for the conference call to start. You got to start over again because somebody came in late. Be on time. Excel at preparation. We often think, okay, did I excel today as I delivered this presentation? But did I excel when I was preparing this presentation? When I was in the improv troupe of many years ago, my friends would say, so what are you doing tonight, Glenn? And I'd say, oh, I'm going to improv practice. And they kind of scratch your head and they go, what is there to practice? It's improv. But yet there are lots of things to practice, right, to get good at the rules and the techniques that I talked about. Excel at the preparation side. Ask yourself, folks, I think this is one of the most important questions, and this is a great question for you to ask yourself all day today as you listen to all these great technical speakers put technical ideas out there. What is the problem you're trying to solve? I just think asking this question is a really powerful and interesting question, and you want to be asking it in your life as you make choices about things all the time. Make your partner look good. In my improv scene example, Chris was not making me look good. You know, he's making me look stupid. I don't want to do scenes with Chris anymore. So you want to make your partner look good, because then they're going to want to continue to work with you. Respect. Don't revere. To me, revere means that you're afraid to ever change anything. So you can respect something, but still, if necessary, be willing to change it. Listen to the whole person. We didn't really get into body language, but you know how that works. Read the room. We talked about that. Share the conversation. You know, when there's something that needs sharing, be the person that shares what's going on. Love your work. Do you love your work? I hope you do. I love my job. I have a great time. If you don't love your work, go find work that you do love. Everybody needs to love their work. Applaud others. People do a good job. Say we rather than I whenever possible. That'll go a long way to creating that good collaborative team environment we've been talking about. Consider that you might not be right. We talked about that. Open your door. Literally, if you work in an office, open your door. Who knows what might wander in? Something very interesting or useful. Open your door. Try not to work out of fear. Work from a sense of possibility. I go to a lot of conferences like this, and I meet a lot of people, and every once in a while I meet someone that's like, is just fearful in their job, and I'm so sad about that. To go to work every day and afraid you're going to get yelled at, afraid you might get fired, man, tough life. So really try to work out of a sense of possibility, not just fear. Understand the audience you're trying to win over and give them a role. I think this is very interesting, especially if you happen to work in an IT organization that's supporting other people. You know, give them a role as you try to provide good support to them. There was a story. There was a nonprofit organization, and they had a board that ran the organization, and there was one member of the organization that was all the time complaining about the board. The board was stupid. The board didn't know what they were doing. The board is running this thing into the ground. So what did the board do? They invited that guy to join the board. Give him a role. Okay, so understand the audience and give them a role. And at the end of the day, folks, be an improviser. Think like an improv actor. And I tell you, if you do that, if you think like an